The 2008 Democratic primary had to be one of the most experienced fields in presidential history. By the time the Iowa caucuses came around on January 3rd, all of the candidates had a combined total of 32,874 days in the U.S. Senate, 11,346 days in the U.S. House of Representatives, 4,749 days as governor, 886 days as a cabinet member, and 551 days as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. This is a total of 50,406 days of experience in either federal office or the chief executive of a state, which totals just 4 days shy of 138 years of experience. And when Iowans went to their caucus locations on that cold January evening to select a person who they felt best suited to lead the Democratic Party in the next election, they picked the candidate with the least experience, Illinois Senator Barack Obama. Obama only had 1,096 days of experience as a U.S. Senator, which is just a little over 2% of the total combined experience in the field. Of course, this would be a wise choice as Obama would go on to win the presidency and serve 2 terms in office. But how did Obama become the nominee in the first place? In this video, we're going to take a look back at the 2008 Democratic Party primary, in which Barack Obama defeated one of the most experienced fields in modern political history. Hello and welcome to Election History. My name is Dave and I have over 30 years of experience working on campaigns, as well as a master's degree from McGill University focused on political science with a concentration in voting behavior. If you like election-related content, please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell for notifications, and like the video. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon members and my YouTube members. If you would like to help out the channel, you can join here on YouTube by clicking the join button below, or you can become a Patreon member with the link in the description. Now, onto today's video. After George Bush's re-election as president in 2004, things started going south for the Republican Party. When re-elected, Bush's approval rating was at 55% according to Gallup. 2 years later, at the time of the midterm elections, his approval rating had dropped to 33% as the American public started questioning the validity of the story about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, as well as the beginning signs of a weakening economy. As a result, Democrats saw their opportunity to pounce. In the 2006 midterm elections, Democrats took control of Congress, gaining 31 seats, took control of the U.S. Senate, gaining 5 seats, flipped 6 gubernatorial offices, and took control of 3 state Senate chambers and 6 state House chambers, with only losing the state House chamber in Montana. This showed just how weak George Bush and the Republican Party were. But with this being Bush's second term, there was no incumbency advantage for the upcoming 2008 presidential election. Some big names decided not to run, like Al Gore and John Kerry, but many decided to throw their hat into the ring. And with that, let's look at the Democratic candidates for the 2008 Democratic nomination for president. The first group of candidates that we're going to look at are those that are the experienced longshots, those who did have a wealth of experience, but who were considered outsiders by the media. In fact, this group of candidates actually had the most experience of any other groups that we will talk about in this video. First, we have Chris Dodd, the U.S. Senator from Connecticut, who became senator in 1981, replacing the popular Abe Ribicoff. Prior to that, he had served in the U.S. House of Representatives since 1975. A few years prior, his father, Thomas Joseph Dodd, served as the other U.S. senator besides Ribicoff. While Dodd wasn't the highest profile of senators, he was well known nonetheless. Most of his supporters came from New England, as he was the only New Englander running for the nomination. Many members of the Kennedy family endorsed his nomination, with the noticeable exception of Ted Kennedy. Honestly, that might be a good thing. Anyway, he also had the endorsement of the International Association of Firefighters, who had endorsed John Kerry in 2004. Among his campaign staff was his campaign manager, Cheryl Cohen, who was the senator's chief of staff, Jim Jordan, No, not that Jim Jordan, who was one of John Kerry's early campaign managers in 2004, and Stan Greenberg, a pollster and father of the term Reagan Democrats, after his examination of Macomb County, Michigan in 1985. Honestly, that Macomb County, Michigan Reagan Democrats thing might be a good future video. I'll write that down. Tell me if that's something you'd like to hear about. Anyway, Dodd announced that he was running for president on the Imus in the Morning show on January 11th, 2007, mostly because of his opposition to the Iraq War. Between his announcement in the Iowa caucuses, Dodd never polled over 2% in any nationwide Democratic poll. Another candidate who was also polling poorly despite his vast experience was Bill Richardson, the first Hispanic to run for the Democratic nomination. Richardson was serving as governor of New Mexico at the time he announced that he was running for president, 10 days after Dodd on January 21st on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, which was a bit more professional than Imus in the Morning. But prior to being governor, he was a congressman, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and Secretary of Energy under Bill Clinton. While other candidates might have been on the job longer, Richardson is by far one of the most experienced candidates to ever run for president, being a governor, congressman, ambassador, and cabinet member. As for the reasons why Richardson decided to run for president, it wasn't really clear. It seemed to be the next logical step in his political career. Most of his campaign's messaging was vague and lacked specifics. While he never had a Ted Kennedy moment, check out that video as well, he was never really clear as to why he was running. His campaign staff consisted of Dave Contarino as campaign manager, who was also his campaign manager when he ran for governor, as well as his chief of staff. Amanda Cooper, deputy campaign manager and Richardson's fundraiser from previous elections, as well as Steve Murphy and Mark Putnam, two media consultants who had worked for Richard Gephardt in the past and had experience throughout the United States when it came to advertising and media. As for most of the rest of his campaign, they were mostly those who had worked with Richardson in the past. Leading up to the Iowa caucuses, Richardson never polled over 4% in any nationwide Democratic poll. Speaking of Iowa, Iowa's Governor Tom Vilsack also threw his hat into the ring before the other two on November 30th, 2006. However, he eventually dropped out on February 23rd, 2007, nearly a year before the Iowa caucuses, citing funding problems. He was polling 1% or less in the polls, and a large number of Americans didn't know who he was. While he was considered a moderate candidate, being the favorite of the Democratic Leadership Council, a DC think tank that gave us the likes of Bill Clinton and Al Gore, most Americans had no idea what his views were on the issues. So yeah, you could say that it was fundraising, since most people probably didn't want to donate to a candidate that they had no idea existed in the first place. Eventually, he endorsed Hillary Clinton in the primaries, but I wanted to mention Vilsack as a candidate since he technically was a candidate, though he dropped out before the Iowa caucuses. The last of the experienced longshots is the one that you all know, Joe Biden. Unlike the other candidates who were making their first runs for the presidency, Biden had run 20 years earlier in 1988. I have no idea, but that has to be one of the longest gaps between presidential runs ever. Comment down below if you know the answer to that question. But Biden was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1972 at the age of 30 and is one of the youngest senators to ever serve. Of course, he would run for president in 1988 when he oddly had less hair then than he does now. Anyway, he would drop out of the race because he was accused of plagiarizing a speech by British Labour leader Neil Kinnock. Again, you can check out the video about Labour as well. Biden would go on to have a high-profile career in the U.S. Senate, particularly when it came to his role as the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee and the Judiciary Committee. Biden would announce that he was running for president on January 7th, 2007, just 4 days before Chris Dodd. As with Richardson, he focused more on his experience in office and even made the cornerstone of his campaign the argument of experience versus change, particularly when Barack Obama had been a U.S. Senator just a little over 2 years when Biden made his announcement. And while it might seem odd when we look at Biden today, he was a prolific speaker and a powerful speaker as well. He knew the issues and he knew how to get the room fired up. Now, on a personal note, when I worked for the John Edwards campaign in Nevada in 2007, we attended the Clark County Jefferson Jackson dinner at the Paris Hotel on the Las Vegas Strip. And when Biden got up to speak, all of us at the Edwards table looked at each other and literally said, "How is this guy not winning by a mile?" And remember, we're from a rival campaign, the Edwards campaign. So, those of you who might be younger and only know Joe Biden in terms of his "we beat Medicare" blunders, go back to his speeches in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s, and you can see just how good he really was. It's sad to see how much he's declined over the years, but yeah, he was a pretty decent speaker back in the day. But back to his campaign, which was managed by Luis Navarro, his former campaign manager and chief of staff. Yeah, that seems to be a trend with these senators always having their chiefs of staff involved. As far as the rest of his staff, it was almost exclusively from either his Delaware campaigns or his Senate office. His sister, Valerie Biden Owens, was his national director for the campaign. But another big name who was a policy advisor for the campaign was Tony Blinken, the future Secretary of State under Joe Biden's administration. Going into Iowa, Biden had dropped from being at about 7% in 2005 to around 2% in 2008. Now, let's move a little bit outside of the box with some lesser known candidates. The first one that we'll talk about is Dennis Kucinich, the Cleveland congressman who had just recently married his second wife, who was 31 years younger than he was. Uh, anyway, Kucinich was easily the most liberal candidate in the race. He did run in 2004, not winning a single primary or caucus, and only 40 delegates to the convention. In 2008, he had more name recognition, but was still outside the political mainstream. Some might say that he was ahead of his time because his views were very similar to Bernie Sanders today. Unfortunately for him, most of the people remember him for believing in UFOs than being a serious presidential candidate. But hey, so did Jimmy Carter, so who's to judge? Anyway, his campaign didn't have much staff, though he was endorsed by Willie Nelson and Gore Vidal. As for most of the candidates already mentioned, Kucinich never polled over 4% in any national poll. He announced his candidacy on December 12th, 2006. Then we have Mike Gravel, the former U.S. Senator from the state of Alaska. He was probably taken the least seriously of any of the presidential candidates and never polled over 2% in any of the national polls. Gravel was against the Iraq War like the other Democratic candidates, but also had a mix of progressive ideas like a single payer healthcare system and conservative ideas like a national sales tax. But most of all, he was basically known as the anti incumbency candidate, railing against the powers in Washington. His campaign was very similar to Ross Perot's campaign, but without the support and without the money. He announced that he was running on April 17th, 2006, and was probably best known for his commercial, this one right here. And yes, I'm going to play the whole thing. Now, let's get to the major contenders for the election. First, we'll start off with John Edwards, who I actually worked for in Nevada in 2007. Edwards was the former U.S. Senator from North Carolina who ran in 2004 for the Democratic nomination and was the vice presidential candidate for John Kerry after the primaries. Therefore, his name recognition was high. But between the two elections, Edwards changed his campaign messaging. In 2004, Edwards was more of a moderate Democratic Leadership Council type, mostly in the mold of Bill Clinton and Al Gore. But in 2008, he was more of a populist progressive, focusing more on income inequality and ending poverty in 30 years, free tuition for those who worked part time while attending university, a universal healthcare program, and other progressive ideas. To give you an idea of how Edwards' campaign had changed, you can just look back at his campaign staff between the two campaigns. In 2004, Nick Baldick, who was involved with the Gore campaign in 2000, was his campaign manager. Jonathan Price, a former Clinton White House aide, was the deputy campaign manager, along with David Ginsburg, who also worked on Gore's 2000 campaign. In fact, most of his campaign was either Clinton or Gore alumni. Another person who worked with John Edwards in 2004 was David Axelrod. Also, Bob Shrum, a failed political consultant for both Al Gore and Ted Kennedy back in 1980, worked for Edwards. Seriously, those who worked for Kennedy in 1980 have an impressive track record of losing. Another Kennedy guy from 1980 was Joe Trippi, Howard Dean's 2004 campaign manager who snatched defeat from the jaws of victory in the Democratic primaries. In 2008, he was John Edwards' media consultant. But even with this obsession of picking bad former Kennedy advisors, Edwards' campaign was managed by David Bonnier, a former congressman and Democratic House whip from Michigan who had a very strong tie to labor unions and other progressive economic causes. He also kept a lot of his 2004 staff like Nick Baldick, Price, and Jennifer Palmieri, who would later serve under Obama as the White House communications director. Still, even though Trippi had a bad record of losing and Bonnier didn't have any track record when it came to running a major presidential campaign, both men represented Edwards' shift to the left. Edwards announced that he was running for president just after the 2006 midterm elections on December 28, 2006. Before the primary, his polling numbers were consistently between 12 and 20%, always finishing third behind the next two candidates that we're going to talk about. Even with all of the other candidates that we've mentioned so far, there were really only two candidates that most people remember from this election. With that, let's start off with Hillary Rodham Clinton. Unless you've been living under a rock or found this video while searching for cat videos, Hillary Clinton is the wife of former President Bill Clinton. In 2000, Hillary ran for the U.S. Senate in New York, despite only moving to New York on September 7, 1999, when her and Bill bought a house in Chappaqua, New York. She announced that she was running for the U.S. Senate on February 6, 2000, 5 months after she officially set up residency in the state. Clinton would go on to win that election by more than 12% over Congressman Rick Lazio. In her re-election bid in 2006, she dominated, winning 67% of the vote and beating Republican John Spencer by 36%. Of course, the U.S. Senate was considered her stepping stone to the presidency. When she ran in 2000, she promised the voters of New York that she would not run for president in 2004, and she kept that promise. But with her dominant 2006 Senate run, she was easily considered a frontrunner for the Democratic nomination in 2008. In a CNN opinion research poll conducted between November 17th and 19th of 2006, Clinton was leading in a hypothetical Democratic primary voting by 18%, which included Barack Obama, John Edwards, John Kerry, and Al Gore. If she had a clear lead amongst these candidates, she surely could win the nomination. Clinton made her announcement on January 20th, 2007. When she became an official candidate, her polling numbers skyrocketed. Numbers had her between 34% and 45%, leaving everyone far behind. This more than likely kept people like John Kerry and Al Gore out of the race. Her campaign message focused on her being a safe and electable choice, saying that she was ready to lead from day one. Hillary's campaign manager before the Iowa caucuses was Patty Solis Doyle, who was an advisor for Hillary Clinton when she was First Lady. Her chief strategist was Mark Penn, who would later become known as a deep state conspiracy theorist, as well as a diehard supporter of Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. She also had a number of other advisors from the Clinton White House and the DNC during Clinton's presidency. Harold Ickes, the son of the former Secretary of the Interior, was a senior advisor for the campaign who had known the Clintons for decades. He and Penn would often clash when it came to the direction of the campaign. And now we come to the candidate with by far the least experience in federal office, Barack Obama. 4 years earlier, Obama gained national prominence with his keynote speech at the Democratic National Convention in 2004 while running for the United States Senate in Illinois. At the time, he was a state senator from the South Side Chicago District 13 since 1997. During his term in the state Senate, he ran against popular Democratic incumbent Congressman Bobby Rush in the 1st Congressional District, a district held by big names such as 1936 Olympian Ralph Metcalfe and former Chicago Mayor Harold Washington. Oh, and another plug for that video as well. But Obama would go on to lose that election to Rush, with Rush winning 61% of the vote to Obama's 30%. Donnie Trotter had 7%. And no, we are not related. During his time as a state senator, he was never part of the Democratic leadership. Yes, he held a few chairmanships throughout his time and passed legislation as well. Some of it was quite meaningful, such as requiring interrogations to be videotaped. But overall, he was an average state senator that the average citizen outside of the South Side District would probably have never heard of. Still, when a U.S. Senate seat opened up with Peter Fitzgerald, a Republican, deciding not to run, Obama jumped into the race. Interestingly, while there were many people in the field itself was mostly filled with unknowns. The highest profile candidate was probably Dan Hines, who was the comptroller of Illinois and had most of the union support behind him. As for Obama, his campaign mostly focused on the opposition to the Iraq War. Obama had a constant lead over Hines by about 10% in the polls. And once primary day came, Obama dominated the primary, winning 52.8% to Hines' 23.7%. But winning the general election wasn't a slam dunk. His Republican opponent was Jack Ryan. No, not that Jack Ryan. Not that Jack Ryan. And not even that Jack Ryan, who is the best of Jack Ryans. But this Jack Ryan, a former investment banker and partner with Goldman Sachs, who got into journalism and media after retiring from Goldman Sachs at the age of 40. Anyway, Ryan had the looks, he was able to speak well, and he would have been a formidable opponent against Barack Obama. Now, I say would have because the press started poking into Ryan's divorce files, which were made public a few days before Obama's DNC keynote speech, which propelled him to national prominence. Ryan was married to Jeri Ryan, a famous actress who was known for her roles in Star Trek. Anyway, it became known that Jack asked his wife Jeri to do freaky things at a strip club. Polls before this was made public had Ryan within 8% of Obama, which was within the margin of error. But with the combination of Obama's speech and Ryan's problems, he dropped out of the race on July 29th. Ryan was eventually replaced by Alan Keyes, a right-wing New Yorker who never had any connections to the state of Illinois whatsoever. In 2000, he criticized Hillary Clinton, a Chicago native, as being a carpetbagger for running in New York State for the U.S. Senate. Now, on the flip side, having a New Yorker running in Illinois for the U.S. Senate, Keyes said that it was okay for him to run in Illinois because it was God's will. Yeah, Keyes would go on to get crushed in the 2004 Senate race in Illinois, with Obama winning 70% of the vote, making it the most lopsided election for U.S. Senate in the state of Illinois. After being elected senator, it could be fair to say that Barack Obama was more interested in building his national profile than actually serving as senator. He did sponsor and co-sponsor some legislation, but it always seemed as running for president was top of mind for the newly minted senator. In fact, just a little over 2 years into his senatorial term, Obama announced that he was running for president on February 10th, 2007 from the steps of the old Capitol building in Springfield, Illinois. And as we all know, his message was about hope and change. Now, if you're a modern political junkie, especially in the Democratic world, you probably need no introduction to Obama's Dream Team, as it became known as. His campaign manager was David Plouffe, who at the time wasn't the highest profile of campaign managers when he took the job, having mixed successes for smaller offices. His senior advisor was David Axelrod, who we've already mentioned. His senior communications director was Robert Gibbs, with Dan Pfeiffer being under Gibbs. His chief speechwriter was John Favreau. No, not that John Favreau. His foreign policy advisor was Samantha Power, with Ben Rhodes being his foreign policy speechwriter. Jen O'Malley Dillon was his battleground state director, and Tommy Vitor was his Iowa press secretary. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you might be saying, hey, where's John Levin? Actually, he was a speechwriter for Hillary Clinton in 2008. He joined Obama during the White House transition. And with that, we have our main candidates for the 2008 Democratic nomination for president. To get a true understanding of how this whole thing works, we need to talk about how delegates are selected to the Democratic National Convention. It was significantly different than 1976, which I talk about in my Carter video about his nomination victory in 1976. There are two types of delegates that we're going to talk about, which are pledged delegates and unpledged delegates, which eventually became known as superdelegates. As for the pledged delegates, they were awarded at both the statewide and congressional district level. In order for a candidate to receive delegates, they needed to meet a 15% threshold at either the state or congressional level. For all of the candidates that met that threshold, then the delegates are distributed according to proportional representation. Therefore, it's this 15% number in the first few contests which will determine whether a campaign sinks or swims. Then we come to the unpledged delegates, which I will call superdelegates from this point forward, since that is what they are commonly known as. Superdelegates were party leaders, elected officials, and other senior members of the party that had free will to vote for whatever candidate they liked. Superdelegates accounted for nearly 20% of the overall delegates to the National Convention. Therefore, if any of the superdelegates made public endorsements, then the media would count this as one delegate towards the candidate's delegate count. Now, this is how most of the states operated, but there were two states that were on the outs, Michigan and Florida. According to the DNC rules, no other state could hold primaries or caucuses before Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, or South Carolina. But both Michigan and Florida decided to move up their primaries. In the case of Florida, the Democrats had no say. The Florida legislature, which was dominated by Republicans in both chambers, voted to move up the Florida primary to January 29, 2008. The change passed and was signed by Republican Governor Charlie Crist on July 25, 2007. In the case of Michigan, the Democrats controlled the House of Representatives, but the Republicans controlled the Senate. Still, the change passed through both chambers by May 10, 2007, and was signed into law by Democratic Governor Jennifer Granholm a few days later. As a result, the Democratic National Committee decided to punish both delegations. Now, in the case of Florida, they really didn't have any say, unlike the Democrats in Michigan. On September 24, 2007, the DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee formally warned the two states about the consequences of holding their primaries early and allowing them to consider other options. With this, John Edwards, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Bill Richardson removed their names from the Michigan ballot, while Hillary Clinton, Chris Dodd, and Dennis Kucinich and Mike Gravel kept their names on the ballot. In Florida, all their names stayed on the ballot since the campaigns thought that there might be an exception due to the Republican legislature. Still, after nothing had been done by either state, the full DNC voted on December 1st to strip both states of their delegates, both pledged and superdelegates. As a result, Obama, Edwards, Biden, and Richardson pledged not to campaign whatsoever in either Michigan or Florida during the primaries. Remember that for later. Initially, in both state and national polls, Hillary Clinton was ahead of the rest of the field, but it wasn't a big lead considering the Clinton name. In a Quinnipiac University poll released just after Barack Obama made his announcement in Springfield, Clinton had 38% to Obama's 23%. Yes, it was a decent lead, but not a dominant one that the Clinton campaign had been hoping for. John Edwards was a distant fourth in that poll at 6%. The person who was third in that poll was a candidate who had yet to make his intentions known, which was Al Gore. While Gore continued to say that he didn't plan to run, he never said that he wouldn't run. This semantical difference made some think that there was a chance. Over the next few months, the gap between Clinton and Obama would decrease. Much of this was due to Edwards improving in the polls, but also increased speculation that Gore would jump into the race. In an Associated Press Ipsos poll done on June 4th through June 6th, Hillary Clinton received 33% support, with Obama at 21%, Gore at 20%, and 12% for Edwards. If Gore entered the race, then it was anyone's guess as to who the frontrunner for the nomination was. A USA Today Gallup poll done 1 month later, on July 12th through 15th, found Gore in third place with 16% support, with Clinton at 34%, Obama at 25%, and Edwards at 9%. But when they removed Gore from the poll, Clinton's numbers increased by 6%, Obama's by 3%, and Edwards by 4%. Yes, Clinton benefited, but barely. Subsequent polls would indicate that Gore's support would split basically equally among the three frontrunners. Even though early national polls gave mixed signals to Gore, the early state polls didn't treat him well. In the only Iowa poll conducted with Gore's name in it on December 18th of 2006 by KCCI, Gore only received 7% and was in fifth place. New Hampshire wasn't much better. In a Franklin Pierce University poll on September 11th through 14th, Gore only received 5% of the vote, 5 percentage points behind Bill Richardson, and only 2 percentage points ahead of Dennis Kucinich. In Nevada, Gore was at only 8% and in fifth place in a August Reno Gazette-Journal poll. In South Carolina, a July poll by CNN showed Gore in a distant fourth place with only 10% support. Even though his national numbers looked good, the state numbers were killing him. But on October 8th, 2007, Gore ended all speculation and announced that he wasn't running for president. Now, with Gore out of the way, let's delve into the first caucus, Iowa. Before we get into the specific campaigns, let's talk about how the caucuses work. Caucus goers meet at the precinct level at a specific location, like a school gym or something similar. Representatives from each campaign try to convince caucus goers to support their candidates. Once the electioneering is over, the campaign representatives go to different locations in the venue. Once that is done, the caucus goers go to which candidate they support or decide to be uncommitted. If a candidate doesn't have 15% of caucus scores, or more if the county is smaller, it is considered a non-viable candidate, and those delegates can go to another campaign, team up with another non-viable candidate to reach 15%, or be uncommitted. Once that sorting is done, then the precinct delegates are selected to go to the county convention, which in turn will go to the state and congressional conventions. Therefore, the night that we know as the Iowa caucus is really only one step in a longer process. Between December and caucus day, which was January 3rd, the lead in the Iowa polls changed from Clinton to Obama to Edwards. There wasn't a clear leader. As for the Edwards campaign, he had finished a strong and surprising second place in 2004, with much of his organization remaining with him. Since Edwards knew that he would be running for president again, he kept his campaign structure intact. If Edwards were to win Iowa, that would be a major shock to the system, which had been pushing for a Hillary versus Obama matchup for the last year. As for the Edwards strategy, his focus was on rural counties and having an organization in all 99 counties with precinct organizers in 90% of the precincts in the state. His campaign knew that Clinton and Obama would probably do better in larger counties, like Polk County where Des Moines is, as well as university counties like Johnson and Story counties. Therefore, he wouldn't concentrate in those counties. The Edwards campaign also focused on identifying and winning over the supporters of candidates who didn't meet the thresholds at the caucus. Therefore, a lot of their messaging was focused on Biden and Richardson supporters, as well as those of Tom Vilsack, who actually dropped out before the caucus. This meant that Edwards targeted those who had attended caucuses in the past. As for the Obama campaign strategy, they also had a large organization, especially in rural Iowa. But unlike having precinct level organizations, which could be quite costly, they focus on having neighborhood team leaders, which would encompass several precincts. But one big difference between Obama and Edwards was in the way that their organization was trained. When it came to Edwards's people, they were basically just hired, put on the ground, and told to go. As for the Obama campaign, they had Camp Obama programs, a training program that prepared them to organize and grow support for Obama. Not only did this training help Obama in Iowa, but in other states as well, as the structure could easily uproot and move to another state. While Edwards mostly focused on older rural voters who had gone to caucuses in the past, Obama concentrated on younger voters in college towns, independent voters who didn't have strong feelings for either party, and first time caucus goers. As far as geography, the Obama campaign also focused on eastern Iowa, as many of those counties also received a lot of media from neighboring Illinois, which is where Barack Obama was from. As for the Hillary Clinton campaign, it was very different. While Edwards and Obama focused more on communities to build their support, Clinton relied on Democratic parties to build her support. Her organization would be conducted at the county level, with county Democratic Party officials taking the lead. This also meant that her campaign was more of a top down structure, with Democratic County Party chairs running the ground efforts in the county. Her core targets were also different than those of Edwards and Obama. Clinton mostly targeted women voters, labor union households, and strong and loyal Democrats in the past. She hoped that local unions endorsing her would give her the lead amongst those voters voting for her in the caucus. She also had another weapon in the form of former President Bill Clinton, who would make the rounds in Iowa. Remember, in 1992, Senator Tom Harkin won Iowa, and Clinton was basically unopposed in 1996, so he never had any serious campaigning in the Hawkeye state during the caucus season. But Clinton's top down approach was a problem, making it seem as those who were given responsibilities in the campaign were more likely to be Democratic loyalists than people who truly wanted a change. And if anyone watching this has worked in politics before, people who are members of local Democratic parties are usually the laziest people involved in campaigns. They want the title of being a party chairman or a party precinct captain, but never want to do any work to get Democrats elected. Yes, there are exceptions, but this is usually the rule. Because of this, Hillary's campaign suffered on the ground. Another major flaw that Hillary had was that there was no plan to get non viable or uncommitted support on caucus night. Especially since there were a number of candidates that were probably going to be non viable, this was another major oversight by the Clinton campaign. When caucus night came, Barack Obama won 37.6% of the precinct delegates to the county conventions, with John Edwards second place at 29.7%, and Hillary Clinton third at 29.4%. Many people in the media called this a major upset, as they thought that Clinton would win the caucuses easily, even if by a narrow margin. But this shouldn't have been seen as a surprise, as the polls in the weeks before the caucus showed it being anybody's race. Both Obama and Edwards benefited from winning over non-viable candidate supporters, something that the polling wasn't picking up for at the time. As for the other candidates, both Joe Biden and Chris Dodd dropped out of the race immediately after caucus night. Biden would also endorse Barack Obama that night. Bill Richardson finished fifth with less than 1% of delegates, but was polling somewhat decent in New Hampshire and would continue to fight there. Obviously, both Obama and Edwards were happy with the results, but the Clinton camp wasn't. Not only were there discussions within the campaign as to who is to be held responsible for the disaster, but the direction of the campaign as well. For months, Harold Ickes had been arguing that the campaign shouldn't ignore caucus states and that it was entirely possible that none of the candidates would have enough delegates to win the nomination at the convention. His chief rival in the campaign, pollster Mark Penn, argued that Clinton's messaging should drive home the point that Hillary was the inevitable nominee, that an overall national message was more important than focus on winning delegates to the convention. After Iowa, Ickes was proven right, but the infighting continued and both men stayed on the Clinton campaign. After Iowa, the momentum was behind Barack Obama going into the New Hampshire primary just 5 days later, and the polls showed this momentum. In a CNN WMUR University of New Hampshire poll conducted on January 5th through 6th, Obama was leading with 39% support and Clinton with 29% support. Edwards was a distant third at 16% support. In fact, all of the New Hampshire polls after the Iowa result, Obama was in the lead and usually in a significant lead as well. But between the two primaries, there was a debate between the three frontrunners and Bill Richardson on ABC and WMUR on January 5th. In the debate, Hillary Clinton had a strong performance and reinforced her experience argument. She also argued that she was the most electable candidate, continuing with her campaign message. As for Barack Obama, he didn't have the greatest debate performance and was known more for this quote.
He's very likable. I agree with that. I don't think I'm that bad.
You're likable enough,
thank
Hillary,
you so
no
much.
doubt.
With this quote making him come off looking quite smug. Also, he focused on hope and change, but didn't seem to expand beyond a basic feel good message. In fact, many during the primary argued that Obama was a great speaker, but not necessarily the best debater. Almost everyone in the media considered Hillary Clinton the winner of the debate. Then there was the Hillary Clinton crying moment. On January 7th, when talking to a small group of supporters in Keene, New Hampshire, Clinton started talking about the pressures of the campaign as well as the attacks against her and her campaign. As she was talking about it, she started to tear up. For some people, this made her look like someone who could be a weak leader. But for most people, it showed a human side to Clinton. Prior to this, many people saw Hillary as a selfless politician that had no emotion. With this moment, it actually showed that she had a human side, which connected with the voters. As for the Obama campaign, he was leading in the polls, but the game was totally different compared to Iowa. Because this was a primary, the tactics that Obama used in Iowa were essentially useless. Yes, Obama did have a good campaign structure on the ground, but Hillary's organization was probably stronger. But even with Hillary's grassroots effort being more experienced and organized, Obama was leading in the polls. Basically, he kept with the same messaging that he had used in Iowa. But the good debate performance and the crying moment for Hillary was a game changer in New Hampshire. On primary day, which was January 10th, Clinton won 39.1% of the vote to Obama's 36.5%. Edwards was a distant third with 16.9%. As for Richardson, who was hoping to finish well, he only won 4.6% of the vote and dropped out of the race. Dennis Kucinich, who thought there might have been voter fraud, demanded a recount since the polls showed that Obama was significantly ahead of Clinton, though the results didn't show that. The recount started, which resulted in no significant changes and was eventually stopped a few days later. But even with the New Hampshire primary victory, more superdelegates and high-profile members of the party were endorsing Barack Obama. 2 days after the New Hampshire primary, 2004 Democratic nominee John Kerry endorsed Obama. Not only was this a big catch, but a big blow to the Edwards campaign, as Edwards was Kerry's running mate 4 years earlier. 1 day later, Arizona Governor Janet Napolitano endorsed Obama. The day after that, moderate Democratic Senator from Nebraska Bill Nelson endorsed Obama. The day after that, another moderate senator, Claire McCaskill, endorsed Obama. And the day after that, Congressman G.K. Butterfield endorsed Obama. This last one was important because it showed black support in the South, which had been loyal Clinton supporters for 16 years, now shifting over to Obama. So before Iowa, Clinton looked like the candidate to beat. After Iowa, it looked like Obama. Now, after New Hampshire with Hillary Clinton winning, we were back to square one again. Next, we have Michigan. As I mentioned earlier, Michigan was one of the states that had their delegates stripped. That also included superdelegates. And if you remember, both Obama and Edwards removed their name from the Michigan ballot, but Hillary Clinton did not and was actively campaigning in the state in hopes that the delegates would eventually be allowed. And this wasn't an unreasonable thought. When the DNC made their choice, they expected Clinton to easily win the nomination. Now, with it being close and the Clintons having the strongest ties to the members of the DNC, they felt that they could eventually get those delegates back. Of course, this would also mean that Obama would have no delegates from Michigan since he wasn't on the primary ballot. Instead, the Obama and Edwards campaigns asked their supporters to vote for uncommitted. On primary night in Michigan, which was January 15th, Clinton won 54.6% of the vote, with uncommitted winning 39.6%. Just remember this for later in the video. The next caucus state was Nevada, with 34 delegates at stake. The selection process was very similar to that of the Iowa caucuses, but those who actually supported viable candidates after the first round of voting could support another viable candidate in the second round. The 15% threshold was still the same, like in Iowa. When it came to winning Nevada, there were two big names: the Culinary Workers Union, Local 226, and U.S. Senator Harry Reid. As for Reid, he didn't endorse anyone before the caucus, so his influence wouldn't make or break the race. As for the Culinary Workers Union, their parent union, United Here, endorsed Barack Obama, which in turn, the Culinary Workers Union endorsed Obama as well. The Nevada State Education Association endorsed Hillary Clinton. As for the culinary workers, one of the challenges was their ability to participate. Since this was a caucus, which started at a specific time, unlike a primary, which lasted between when the polls opened and closed, many workers who worked on the Las Vegas Strip might miss their opportunity to participate. To mitigate this problem, the Nevada Democratic Party created at-large caucus locations on the Strip to allow hotel workers to participate. One of the things that the Clinton campaign was banking on was the inability of culinary workers to vote for Obama because they were at work. As a result, the Nevada State Education Association filed a lawsuit in federal court to stop these sites from being used. But the U.S. District Court of Nevada dismissed the case, and the at-large locations were to remain open. Hillary Clinton won the most delegates for the Nevada Democratic Party State Convention with 50.8%. Barack Obama had 45%, with Edwards at a distant third with 3.7%. However, because of the geographical distribution of the delegates, Obama would go on to win 13 national delegates to Clinton's 12. This wasn't known immediately because the state convention still had to take place, but in the end, Obama could really be seen as the winner of this, as he had a net gain of one delegate when all was said and done. A few days later, Dennis Kucinich dropped out of the race and would later endorse Obama. So for Hillary Clinton, things were confusing. She had won both New Hampshire and Nevada, but finished equal or behind Obama when it came to delegates to the national convention. It was looking more like Harold Dickey's was right, that this was going to be a close battle for delegates. In the next state, South Carolina, Clinton expected to do well, with Bill Clinton being very popular with African American voters, with many joking that he was the first black president. But since the Iowa caucus, Obama led in every single poll in South Carolina. As for John Edwards, this was his last stand. If he couldn't perform well in neighboring South Carolina, as he was a former senator from North Carolina, then it was highly unlikely that he would win the nomination. Yes, he could possibly be the kingmaker, but a heavy loss could completely knock him out of the running. In the last Reuters C-SPAN Zogby poll, Obama was polling at 41%, with Clinton at 26% and Edwards at 19%, with a sizable number of black voters shifting over from Clinton to Obama over the last 3 weeks. But when the January 26th primary came, Obama dominated. Obama won 55.4% of the vote, along with 25 delegates. Hillary Clinton was a very distant second with 26.5% of the vote and only 12 delegates. John Edwards won 17.6% of the vote and 8 delegates. 4 days later, Edwards would drop out of the race. Also, with Obama's strong showing, Ted Kennedy officially endorsed Barack Obama 2 days later. But the Clinton campaign did get some negative attention after the South Carolina primary, and that came from the mouth of Bill Clinton. After Obama's win, Bill Clinton said, quote, "Jesse Jackson won South Carolina in 1984 and 1988. Jackson ran a good campaign, and Obama ran a good campaign." The implication was that the only reason that Obama won South Carolina was because he did well with black voters. And while that is technically true, it came across as being dismissive of South Carolina and Obama as well. This led to a backlash against Hillary Clinton with many black leaders like John Lewis, congressman from Georgia, who had endorsed Hillary Clinton, wondering if he had backed the wrong horse. The next primary was Florida, which had the same exact problem as Michigan that I mentioned earlier. While all the candidates were on the ballot, Clinton was the only candidate who actively campaigned in Florida. She eventually won with 49.8% of the vote, with Obama getting 32.9% and Edwards with 14.4%. This was always a state that Hillary expected to win anyway, but being under 50% when nobody else was campaigning was a much weaker showing than expected. Now we move on to Tsunami Tuesday. This would usually be called Super Tuesday, but the fact that 23 primaries and caucuses were being held on one day, which was February 5th, made it the day with the most primaries and caucuses held in the history of the United States. This also meant that things were going to change as far as tactics. Instead of trying to win every little farmhouse in Iowa with a strong grassroots campaign, the focus shifted over to a large media blitz and ad buys. This is where the Clinton campaign would likely prevail, as they had more experience when it came to mass media, whereas Obama's strength was in organization. Still, with all of Obama's victories, his earned media was more than enough to make him visible. After all the votes were cast, it was essentially a wash. In total, Clinton won 46% of the vote and 10 states to Obama's 45% of the votes and 13 states. As far as delegates, Obama would have the edge with 849 won to Clinton's 832. So yet again, even when Hillary got the victory and the most votes, Obama gained the most delegates. Throughout the rest of February, Obama dominated the primaries and caucuses, winning every one of them and picking up 289.5 delegates to Clinton's 164.5 delegates. It was also a major turning point in the campaign. Congressman John Lewis, a civil rights icon and friend of the Clintons, retracted his endorsement of Hillary Clinton and formally endorsed Barack Obama on February 27, 2008. This was the first major political figure, as well as first superdelegate, to switch over from Clinton to Obama. Initially, many black voters supported Hillary Clinton because they thought that she had the best chance to win. But as Barack Obama continued to perform well in states with high white populations, many black leaders saw Obama as a winning candidate. This would result in a major shift in African American establishment Democratic support to swing over to Barack Obama. This also meant that some of the superdelegates that Clinton was relying on were starting to also make the shift over to Obama. Now we move on to the March primaries, with Ohio and Texas being the most prominent. Texas had both a mix of a primary and county caucuses, which made it weird. Ohio had a straight-up primary. Both of these were expected to be close, but to give Clinton the edge. When it came to endorsements in Ohio, David Wilhelm, the former DNC chair who served under Bill Clinton's time as president, actually endorsed Obama. In Texas, support was split between candidates, with former House Speaker Jim Wright and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee supporting Hillary, and Congressman Lloyd Doggett and Chet Edwards supporting Obama. Now, I'm not going to get into the specific campaign tactics in each of these states because at this point the race has basically been nationalized. Thus, I'll be focusing more on the results from the states and the broader campaign in general. With that, on March 4th, Hillary Clinton won the Ohio, Rhode Island, and Texas primary, while Barack Obama won the Texas caucus as well as the Vermont primary. On March 8th, Obama dominated the Wyoming primary with 61% of the vote. He also won 61% of the vote in Mississippi. After Mississippi, Bill Richardson endorsed Barack Obama. The March primary showed the problem with the Clinton campaign. Clinton was winning larger states by smaller margins, while Obama was winning smaller states by larger margins. For example, in Ohio, which had 162 delegates, Clinton only won 7 more delegates than Obama. But in Mississippi, which only had 41 delegates, Obama won 7 more delegates than Clinton. Any gains in large states for Clinton were being wiped out by large gains in small states by Obama. The next primary wouldn't be until April 22nd, which was the Pennsylvania primary. However, a lot would happen between those primaries. First was the Jeremiah Wright controversy. Wright was a black pastor from Chicago at a church that Obama had attended. On March 14th, a video surfaced on YouTube of Wright using what many considered anti-American as well as anti-white rhetoric. Obama's connection to Wright could hurt him with white voters, who are the most prominent voting bloc in many of the upcoming primaries, including in Pennsylvania. 4 days later, Obama addressed the controversy by giving a speech at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. There he gave what was considered one of his best speeches ever, now known as a More Perfect Union speech. In the speech, he focused on the issues of racial tension, both in black and white America, closing by saying that America needs to move on from these divisions. Though some criticize Obama for not directly rejecting Wright, his speech received high praise from Democrats as well as Republicans like Mike Huckabee, Newt Gingrich, and other political foes. The second issue was Mark Penn, who left the Clinton campaign on April 6th. Now, you might think that Penn left because of conflicts with Harold Ickes, but that wasn't the case. A few days earlier, Penn met with Colombian officials to discuss a free trade deal between the United States and Colombia, known as the Colombia FTA. Penn, while working for Clinton, was also a lobbyist with a lobbying firm. The media got a hold of this and presented the story as a conflict of interest. And while Penn would stay on as an advisor and pollster, he would no longer be part of the day-to-day operations of the Clinton campaign. Going into Pennsylvania, Clinton was expected to do well. It was one of only 3 states where Clinton had more superdelegates than Obama. Clinton had been leading in every poll going into the primary, with the last Suffolk University poll showing Clinton ahead 52% to 42%. And once the primary came, Clinton won by a 10% gap, 55% to 45%, giving her a net gain of 12 delegates. 2 weeks later, on May 6, both Indiana and North Carolina had their primaries. According to the polls, Clinton was expected to win by about 5% in Indiana, but when the primary came, Clinton had only won the state by a little over 1%, with 50.6% for Clinton and 49.4% for Obama, which gave Clinton a net gain of 4 delegates. As for North Carolina, the polls were inverse to Indiana, giving Obama a 5% lead. But when that primary came, Obama won by 14.5% and had a net gain of 19 delegates, not only negating all of the delegate gains that Hillary Clinton made in Pennsylvania and Indiana, but coming out 3 delegates ahead. Between May 13th and May 20th, there were 3 primaries in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Oregon. Clinton won West Virginia and Kentucky, winning 57 delegates to Obama's 22. In Oregon, Obama won with a net gain of 10 delegates. But even though Clinton had a net positive from these, she was falling behind when it came to superdelegates. During the same period, Barack Obama gained 29 superdelegates to Hillary Clinton's 6 delegates, which again negated all of the gains that she had made in recent primaries. Essentially, it was at this point where Barack Obama said that they were within the reach of the nomination. At this point, the Obama campaign had enough combined pledged and unpledged delegates for a majority, but the Clinton campaign had one more trick up their sleeve. Remember the Michigan and Florida primaries? The Clinton campaign wanted those to be counted and appealed to the Rules and Bylaws Committee of the DNC to have these delegates counted. Now, while there were Clinton people on the committee, like Harold Ickes, most of the people on the committee either had thrown their support behind Obama or remained uncommitted before the convention. The committee met on March 31st to discuss the matter. As a result, the Michigan delegation was allowed to be seated with 59 delegates for Obama and 69 delegates for Clinton. As for Florida, their delegation was split in half, favoring Clinton. In the end, it was a 29 delegate gain for Hillary Clinton. This technically now put Obama outside the majority, as the number to reach a majority now went up to 2,117. But it really wouldn't matter. There were only 3 primaries left: Puerto Rico, Montana, and South Dakota. Hillary Clinton had won both Puerto Rico and South Dakota, with Montana going to Obama. Clinton had a net gain of 22 delegates, which wasn't nearly enough to fight back. This also put Obama ahead in the new threshold for a majority, which was 2,117. Technically, unless there was a dramatic defection in superdelegates, the nomination was Obama's. And while Obama had the number by June 3rd, Hillary Clinton hadn't dropped out yet. She would eventually do so on June 7th. Between June 4th, the day after the South Dakota and Montana primary, to June 7th, Barack Obama gained 101 superdelegates to Hillary Clinton's 4 superdelegates. It was now officially over. Hillary sent a letter to her supporters and gave a concession speech on June 7th, where she endorsed Barack Obama. And that is the 2008 Democratic nomination for president. Many people say that it was a nasty campaign, but I don't know. I think it was particularly dirty between Clinton and Obama people, but for many of us outside of those two camps, we didn't see it that way. It was close and it could have gone to the convention, but I don't think that it was necessarily dirty at all. There weren't any deceptive ads or pure lies about the other candidates. It was just a hard-fought campaign. And with that, thank you very much for watching this video. Check out some of my other videos and like this video and subscribe to the channel. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are. Bye-bye.